We welcome everyone to the Museum of Glass, and the glass blowing process begins down on the right hand, or on your left hand side of this studio. We begin the day by gathering glass out of our furnace. On the left hand side, our furnace is melting approximately 1,000 pounds of glass. Here today, we are going to be using colored glass. Our furnace only holds clear glass. If we wish to use color in today's demonstration, we will use a solid color. On the very end of one of our glass makers, Sarah, she has picked up a small piece of color bar. Now, the way that color is made by adding different metals from the periodic table of elements. Depending what we are making, we can begin by using a small amount of color, or we could use 2 or 3 solid rods together. That will just dictate the density of the color. For today's project, we will begin by creating a cup. This cup will later be stuffed with another cup or with another color. This will give us the ability to use 2 different colors, one on the outside while a different color is on the inside. The process begins by soaking a lot of heat into the solid color. Sarah will use these steel tables around the studio to shape that mass of glass, preparing it for the next step. Now, if you have any questions during today's demonstration, my name is David, and I am more than happy to answer any questions you may have. You can raise your hand or shout my name during today's demonstration. As the color is being shaped down, we have another glass maker introducing our gaffer here today, Ben. Ben's job is to complete this cup. He starts by gathering glass and rolling back and forth on the steel table. He's preparing that mass of glass for a beginning bubble. By blowing air through the blowpipe and placing his finger on the opposite end, we create a closed atmosphere. The air has no place to go but to pierce a small air bubble. We will now let this core cool down, eventually placing the solid color on top of this bubble, later on spreading it out, creating an even layer of color all around the bubble. Well, it doesn't matter what color we work with. At this temperature, all color looks red and orange. Its true color will come back once this mass has cooled it down. To ensure we have an even thickness all the way around, an even color density, we will go back using our steel tables to ensure that that color is pushed on evenly. Yes, all the glass that's made here will go through a annealing process. We have a handful of annealers out on this hot shop floor. We have one right here. We also have one on the left and right-hand side. These ovens will come up to 920 degrees, even higher if we want. We will then bring it back down to room temperature. Even the cup that we make here today will go through this annealing cycle. The type of metals we are using. The steel rod is made out of stainless steel, a very poor conductor of heat. For the colors, well, it depends what your favorite color may be. If it's blue, we may add cobalt. To create green glass, we may add chromium or iron. It's specifically metals. We can even use gold. Gold can create a pink and red color. Some of the major pieces of equipment we use here in the studio includes the glory hole, which is a reheating chamber, a furnace at 2100 degrees Fahrenheit or 2300. It's a place where we can reheat the glass and make it more malleable. Very similar to the glory hole, we have a furnace. Here we have one on the left and on the right-hand side, both holding 1,000 pounds of molten glass. A key difference between both furnaces is that the furnace on the left and right-hand side will always be turned on all year around. So what happens if the furnace turns off for any crazy reason? We do have a temporary way to keep the furnace hot at its 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. If for some reason the fuel source is cut off, we do have a way to keep it powered. So we saw a move down here done by our gaffer. Directly after the gather, he held the rod straight down. Now this is called a strip gather. We do this for a few different reasons. It can get rid of the excess glass that we may have gathered, but it can also leave us with a symmetrical shape. Yes, that is clear glass, and that is the only glass that the Museum of Glass will recycle. Anything that ends up here on the ground then becomes contaminated. We don't recycle the color, the one that falls on the ground, because it gets contaminated with dirt and debris that can then go back into the furnace. Another reason is every time you remelt clear glass, you melt out stabilizers and fluxes. These are used in glass to give it a good quality in a lower melting temperature. When you have a higher amount of recycled glass, you then begin to get impurities. Do you have a question all the way in the back? How long does it take to create one piece? Well, it really depends on how complicated the piece itself is. We have a program here at the museum called Kids Design Glass. It's where any child 12 and under can submit a drawing to this contest. We have an education studio outside of the hot shop on your left-hand side. We have markers, pencils, colored pencils, anything you might need to draw and submit a drawing. You can do that, and those pieces, we will only make 2 a day. That's how time-consuming they can be. So the rod that we use here is made out of stainless steel. It's a very poor conductor of heat. If you take a close inspection, notice where our gaffer Ben is placing his hand. It's directly behind any discoloration that may occur towards the tip. Typically, if it's dark, dull gray, or black, we're not placing our hands there in that area. Chances are it will be hot. If the heat does build up past that portion, we will then use cold water on the surface. Now, this is the actual glass blowing portion of glass making. We can see Sarah on this end standing by to blow air through the blowpipe. If you're wondering how much air it takes to blow through that blowpipe, it's about the same air pressure you use to blow out a candle. Using the tool called the jacks, we have created a constriction, a break-off point that we can use to break off the bubble from the rod. This tool is also a great shaping tool. We can use the sides of the blades. This tool, however, we use some beeswax on the very back of the bench. This is to ensure that these blades, these steel blades, won't scratch the surface or leave any mark behind. The next step is to bring over a new rod. We call this the punty. The punty is only a temporary rod that can be used on the very bottom portion, changing the orientation to begin to work on the opposite end. When we're adding this new rod, remember it is temporary, so it needs to be strong enough to withhold any pulling or tugging that may occur, but also weak enough to break later on in today's demonstration. The glass, how much does it originally weigh? Oh, this is quite minute. This is a small amount of glass we're working with right now. The rod probably weighs, if not more, similar to the same amount of glass we have on the end of the rod. Right now, he's doing a very special move. It's called the centering. This is to ensure that that opening portion and the back are on the same plane. It's not wobbling. If we skip this step, the final result, if it's a vase, if it's something tall, we will notice that the top is lopsided. It may be leaning to one side. And the centering is one of the most difficult things to learn as a glass maker, just to see it, the center, while the rod is rotating. That's the difficult portion, is to really decide when the piece is off center and how to adjust it. Now, the team we have working here makes the glass blowing process look easy, but they are professionals. Ben, our gaffer here today, has been working with glass for over 25 years. And then Sarah down on this end has been working with glass for over 18 years. She's standing by with wooden paddles. This is to ensure we have a flat top. Typically, after the transfer, the main portion, we're not going to really inflate it after the transfer. We could inflate it a little bit using what we call a soffietto. It's a light puffer we can use on the opposite end, but the hole needs to be quite small to use this one. Double blown glass. I have not heard that term, unfortunately. I don't know. I can double check and ask, but I really don't know anything about that. Now this cup, if left out here, will get too cold too fast. It actually will break and crack. To prevent it from breaking and cracking, we will set it off into the annealer on your left-hand side of the studio. This oven is sitting at 920 degrees and will be the home of this cup and everything else we produce here today. And that's how we start off a day here at the Museum of Glass. We are going to continue. These cups will be used later on this week in a different demonstration. This is how we will use 2 different colors in one single piece. For our audience that joined us a little later in today's demonstration, we are going to begin with the coloring application. The color begins in a color bar. Depending what we're going to be making, we could use a full rod or we could use just a small amount. Once we've determined how much colored glass to use, we will preheat it inside of the garage. This is a temporary oven at approximately 1,000 degrees. The way that the color is made by a manufacturer, typically overseas. The way that they're making colors, they're adding different metals. Earlier, we learned that by adding cobalt, we can create blue glass. By adding chromium or iron, we can produce green. Manganese can produce purple and black glass. Now, it is possible for the Museum of Glass to produce its own color. If we take, for example, our furnace on the left-hand side, we could add a little bit of cobalt, making all the glass inside of that furnace blue. But after a while, that may get old. So we melt clear glass that gives us the ability to use the full range of the color spectrum. Now, this museum has a very interesting cone-shaped steel structure. This steel structure was designed by Arthur D. Erickson. And one of the main influences of this steel structure is Tacoma's history. Now, Tacoma was founded on a logging town. So in our area, we were considered one of the largest logging exports of the world. We had over 73 lumber mills in our small area. With such a large lumber industry, they would burn a lot of wood also, a lot of excess wood, off-cut lumber, sawdust, anything that needed to be incinerated. They would be incinerated in a cone steel structure, very similar to this one, called the wigwam burner or beehive burner. These burners are long gone, but we do see a photo of them on our top screen. If you want to learn more about Tacoma's history, I do recommend you walk across Tacoma's waterfront. All around the waterfront, there is information panels where you can learn about the logging industry that once stood here. To ensure we have an even amount of colored glass, we will distribute that color on top of the bubble. We do it in 2 steps. First, we begin to distribute it down in the center. This is to ensure it will all be even, going back to the steel table to seal the color and the clear glass together. You are more than welcome to take as many photos and videos as you like. Do recommend the top balcony. It is a great place to take photos and videos. All around the hot shop, we have our steel tables. We call these marvering tables. Now, traditionally, these tables were made out of a solid slab of marble. Nowadays, however, it's been switched to using the steel counterpart. Does the same thing, sucks out the heat out of the glass while shaping it. The only difference is that marble can crack under enormous temperature. So if you gather fresh hot glass and use a marble slab, there is a chance for you to crack that slab on contact. Welcome to the Museum of Glass. Thank you for joining us. My name is David. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Yes. Yeah, take as many photos and videos as you like. For our audience that's just joining us now, welcome to the Museum of Glass. We do want to introduce the glass furnace on the left-hand side of the studio. This is where all the glass is being produced. Here at the museum, we are melting 2,000 pounds of glass between both furnaces. They're both at that 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. Essentially, sitting behind that door lies a crucible. A ceramic pot of glass is what we're heating up here at the museum. When we see that there may be an impurity in the glass, it might be a stone or a bubble or a chip, we're just going to pull that glass right off and snip it free. We are also using a glory hole. This is a reheating chamber at 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. It is slightly hotter than a furnace, with the key exception that this chamber is turned off at night. So the glory hole's about an hour or two it takes for that oven to go from room temperature to that 2,300 desired temperature. The blowing process is about to begin here very shortly. And we're asked to blow. We're blowing about the same air pressure you use to blow out a candle. It does vary, however, if we listen closely, we can hear some of the communication and keywords going on between the team. So what prevents the rod from getting so hot? The rod is made out of stainless steel. It's a very poor conductor of heat. If you take a close inspection, you'll notice that the tip of the rod is turning dull gray and black, right? Notice that Ben's hand is directly behind that discoloration where the rod is still shiny. If the heat does build up past that discoloration and towards the shiny portion, we will then just use cold water on the surface of the rod, which in turn will cool it down. So what is the weight of the rod? I would say this one's about 8 pounds. Another shaping tool we use is a wet padded newspaper. Now this is just normal newspaper you may read at home. We then fold it, drench it in water, and burn right through this newspaper. Yes. All right, so what's going on here when we're using that wet padded newspaper? Why isn't it getting hot? The steam especially also on our hands. Now the newspaper is the closest way we can get to touching the actual hot glass, and it's all personal preference. Some glass makers prefer 5 sheets, some prefer up to 25. It's all personal. It doesn't burn his hand, but we do poke holes in the newspaper itself. This is to ensure that any steam that may actually cause our hand to burn is actually goes back towards the piece. When you're taught how to use the newspapers and how to make newspapers, there's 2 unique ways that I've seen people use them. Some people will poke holes in it to let the steam out. Some will cut the corners of that to let the steam escape. Either way, there's always one way that the steam can take so it doesn't come back to our palm. A new rod is now added on the bottom portion called the punty. We use a few droplets of water on a crevice we made earlier, and a tap breaks it free. When we're heating glass up to this 2300 degree Fahrenheit, it doesn't matter what color it is, it will just make it red and orange. This is one good way we can gauge the heat. With a slight tap, this cup is broken free and off to the annealer. So our audience that is joining us, welcome to the Museum of Glass. Everything that we make here will always go through an annealing cycle. We will place it in the annealer on your left-hand side, sitting at 920 degrees. It will cool back to room temperature over the period of 10.5 hours. This will eliminate any stress that may be built up in the glass, preventing it from breaking or cracking. If we leave our cup out here, it will probably break in 5 or 10 minutes, but even if it doesn't break within those 10 or half an hour, however long, the glass will break at one point. It may be in 5 minutes or it may be in 5 years, but at one point, that glass will break. To eliminate all that stress, it will always go through an annealing cycle. Depending on its density, how thick it is, will determine how long its annealing cycle should be. So I didn't make anything up there, but our team that we see here, Ben and Sarah down here, were part of the team that created all those pieces you see on that top balcony. So our Hot Shop crew did make that. It's a fantastic place to view the live glassmaking. I do recommend it for all our audience at one point or another. Definitely check out the glassmaking from the top balcony. We are going to be moving on to a different project. We're going to be making a bowl, but we are going to be using a mold here today, an optic twist mold. Here shortly, I'll show our audience one. We'll see the one our team is using. But just like today's demonstration earlier, we used color, so we're going to begin by the color application. Just like last time, one glass maker picks up the solid bar on the end of the rod, while another creates the starting bubble on which the color will be applied. And as you can see, typically a color overlay, you need 2 people to do. We always get asked how many people you need to create a team. Well, it really depends on the team. It is possible with 2, 3, and you can even blow glass on your own, but you are limited to the size, scale, complexity, even the color application itself, you are limited to. The process of gathering will be repeated until we have sufficient amount of glass to continue to the next step of our bowl. Typically after a gather, we will use a wooden block, which will ensure that that bubble will blow out evenly. A few moments ago, I had walked around showing one of the optic molds that the crew can use. However, that this one's on a smaller scale. We can see that our crew is using a larger version of that optic mold. Now this mold will create ridges in our bowl that we will see later on. So although we can't see the exact effects of it now, as this piece is blown out, gets thinner, we will then see those creases that we have created. The very top portion is snipped free. This is just thick glass where the bubble does not blow out towards. This is also to ensure we're going to have an even thickness around our bowl. We've used the jacks to create a constriction, also help out our bubble blow out, and to create a flat bottom. Now this tool, the jacks, we do use a little bit of beeswax on the blades. This is just to ensure we're not scratching the top surface. The next step is to bring over the puntee. The puntee is the transfer rod. It will give us the ability to begin to work on the opposite end. Sarah gathers a small mass of glass and then begins to shape that puntee, rolling back and forth on the steel table. How long does it take to plan a piece? Typically, before you even gather, the idea has already been planted. When we transferred our bowl onto a different rod, we no longer have the ability to inflate our piece, so we use a soffietto, which stands for little breeze in Italian, but it's one way that we can inflate our bowl even without a blowpipe. Hello, welcome to the museum. Now, earlier we began to make this bowl using a tool called a jacks. We have now switched over to using a pair of par trophies. The difference between this tool and the one we were using earlier is that this one has wooden blades, just minimizes the contact and also any residue or any scratches that may be left behind. So, American glass blowing, what we're seeing here with the skull on. Anytime we're using wood here in the studio, chances are it is a fruit wood and more than likely it's probably cherry. We prefer fruit wood here in the studio just because it holds more moisture, it lasts longer, has a longer lifespan. Now that our bowl is complete, One of our glass makers, Sarah, has suited up in a heat protective layer, welder's jacket, and Kevlar gloves. With a little bit of water on the end of the punty and a slight tap, this piece is broken free and on its way to the annealer. And how fantastic a crew completes the third piece of the day. By the way, this bowl that we created here will be for sale later on in our store. Later on, of course. It will go through this annealing cycle for the next 10.5 hours, as will everything else we produce here today. Best time to be a glass maker is almost upon us now, the winter time. It's an amazing time to be a glass maker. When you come into this studio or any studio, you can stand by one of the chambers, one of the glory holes, and you're going to be well heated. Well, today's demonstration is going to begin with color, the application of color. The color comes to us and we purchase it from a manufacturer in this bar form. The way that color is made is that the manufacturer adds different metals from the periodic table of elements. If you don't mind me asking, what are your favorite colors here? Any particular colors you're fond of? Orange. You know, I'm glad you said orange because I actually don't know what they use to make orange. I can probably double check with the crew here. Red. To create some red, so we can use gold. So red and pink glass tend to be some of the more expensive color. It's due to that gold content they add. To create blue with turquoise, we can add cobalt. To create blue glass, if you like green, we can add chromium or iron. Black and purple is made by manganese. So by adding a little bit of manganese, you can create purple. By adding a lot of manganese, then create black. Now, we could make color here at the Museum of Glass. We have a furnace on the right-hand side here holding 1,000 pounds. We could take a little bit of that, let's say blue, that cobalt, place it into our furnace, and everything will become blue. But that just means everything made out of that furnace will have the same tint. So by melting clear glass, we're giving ourselves the ability to use a full range of the color spectrum. Depending how dense and how big our piece is going to be, we could use one of these color bars or we could just use a little bit. I'm going to pass this around. As long as we keep passing it around, everyone's going to have a chance to view it. You can inspect it, look through the light with it, whatever you like to do. We can notice that is clear color or colored glass. If we're going to be making a large piece, again, we could take 2 or 3 of those bars together, melting them together. They could be different colors or the same color. For our piece here, we've only taken a few inches of that color bar. We have melted it. We're going to place it on top of a beginning bubble on which we have in the center of the studio. All we're going to do here is create a thin layer of color using that small, massive colored glass. When we place the glass at this temperature, at its 2300 degree Fahrenheit at the glory hole, it's going to turn every color red and orange. Now, although that's not the true color, it will come back once the glass is cooled down. We're going to ensure we spread that color evenly. But here at the museum, when we're deciding what color to use, we have our own color room. Now, the manufacturer has a color room that stacks from color to the ground all the way to the ceiling. But in our video clip here, we could see the colors that the crew has available to them here at the Museum of Glass. Again, this color room is located just below the staircase for our glass makers here. Most studios have their own color room also. I would say ours is a decent size compared to some other studios. For today's demonstration, we're going to be entering an optic mold. Actually, let's double check with our crew before we dive in deep. So here at the museum, we have two furnaces. They're both at 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, sand itself, the main ingredient for glass, that glass wants to melt about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. There's different formulas of glass around the world. NASA uses that specific formulation, just straight silica, nothing else. Their glass can go exit the atmosphere and re-enter because they have such a large melting temperature, over that 5,000 degree Fahrenheit. For our studio, that's way too hot, so we're adding fluxes and stabilizers, soda ash and lime to that clear, or to that silica sand to make the glass we melt here. The glass we make here is specifically formulated for glass makers. It's purchased from a company located about 45 minutes north of Seattle. And their glass is specifically formulated for glass makers. A few years back, they actually sold off the recipe, which is a top kept secret, to a different company for like a nice amount of money. Yeah. Now I'm sure you guys are familiar with like Pyrex glass, that clear stovetop glass that you may use. That is also a different formulation. If we made you one of those pieces here at the museum, the first time you use it in the oven, that just exploded. Like, again, there's different types of glass all around it. The process of gathering is repeated until we have sufficient amount of glass. But after every gather, we will use a wooden block. Most woods that are used in the studio are made from fruit wood, just because they contain more moisture and they will last longer. But the wooden block will ensure that the bubble we have will blow out evenly. It's going to distribute the heat and the glass itself around the bubble. So we use a wet pad of newspaper to shape that mass of glass, control where the air bubbles blowing towards. The newspaper, oh, they're just flat, but yes, you can change them around with your hands. If you press really hard with your index finger and thumb, you can create an indent in the glass also. We go back to a steel tool. We're creating a constriction or a break-off point. Although the break-off point happens early in the demonstration, we will now go back inflating our bubble even more. So our crew that we have here, we don't have a crew that does per se like production. We have a full-time MOG staff. This includes Ben, glassmaker for over 25 years. Sarah on the left-hand side with over 18 years. We have 2 other full-time glassmakers here at the museum. So we have 4 full-time Museum of Glass hot shop staff. The way that we operate is not by producing product for our store. We're not doing production here. The way that we mainly operate is by our visiting artists program. During this past summer, we had over 10 visiting artists from across the world in the United States and even our local community. Typically, this is how we operate. Now, any artist can apply for a residency here at the museum. There's a variety of different ways an artist can end up here at the museum, but you could win up to 5 days with our professional crew that can make anything your heart desires. Later on for a different demonstration. Either way, it's still the basic same rules and steps that we take. We will bring over a punty, which is the transfer rod. This rod is only temporary, which means it will need to break later on in today's demonstration. science of art. So different elementary, high schoolers will come to the museum, and we talk more about the science behind the glass, how heat is lost. A lot of heat conservation is what we really teach here during our school year. So this is kind of like the last time we really focus on glass, knowing what it is, giving it silicon, and we're not looking at the science of it. Back in the olden day, what would they use to fire the furnaces? They would use a lot of wood. Even Murano was dependent on wood for a very long time. Back in the olden days, studios would typically go to an area, deforest the area, and then move to a different location. A lot of wood. We're going to be making a cup that we're going to use later on. Later on in a different demonstration. Well, this cup will be used later in a different demonstration, but if we leave it out here in this hot shop floor, it'll actually get too cold too fast. It can break, crack, or even explode. To prevent it from breaking, we will set it into the oven on your left-hand side with a green number 1. It is currently sitting at 920 degrees and will be the home of this cup and everything else we produce here today. With a slight tap, this cup is broken free and on its way to the annealer. So after we gather glass, we will blow an air bubble. To do so, we blow air through the blowpipe and place our finger over the hole. This creates a closed atmosphere. Since the air has no place to go, it will pierce an air bubble in the mass of glass. In glass making, there's a lot of waiting for the bubble to cool down to gather once again. As we see in this step, our glass maker is stepping back in front of the furnace for yet another layer, which will in turn will make our piece larger. Like different patterns we're seeing? Okay, so then well, we are using a handful of different shaping tools, most importantly, a wet pad and newspaper. Now, this is just the Wall Street Journal folded up. drenched in water, and we were going to burn right through this newspaper. It will only last a few days, but that's totally fine. We're going to go ahead and recycle that and fold a new pair. We are now entering an optic mold. We're going to show one around a smaller version, but it's very similar. It's a mold that we can use to create ridges in the glass itself. Later on, when this piece gets expanded and becomes larger, we will then see the ridges that are left over using an optic mold. Now, this is just a small version. Again, we have a larger version that the crew is making, and when you're purchasing these optic molds, you have a variety of options to choose from. We will remove the tip to ensure we have an even mass of glass all the way around. And as Sarah stands by on the opposite end, we're going to get ready to expand our bubble and make it larger. You know, the more experience, the faster you can make something like this. The crew we have here is extremely talented. Ben has been working with glass longer than I've been alive. If I try to make exactly what they're making, it'll probably take me double the time that Ben makes it in, and mine's gonna look way bad, really bad. Just because I haven't spent as much time in the studio as Ben has. We always get asked, how long does it take to master this material? And it just takes a lifetime. I've been working with glass for almost 8 years now, 9 years, and I realized I haven't learned anything yet. Oh yes, everything that we make here today, if it's not used for a later project, will be going into our store. Our gaffer, Ben is the person in charge of creating this bowl, has asked for a punty. The punty is the transfer on and is being started on the left-hand side of the studio with Sarah. Now, we're going to begin by gathering a small, massive glass and shaping it. It's actually very important, the angle on which we're turning on the surface of the steel table, and also the time it takes to shape that mass. Now, this new handle will only be temporary. It needs to be strong enough to withstand any pulling or tugging that may occur, but it also needs to be weak enough to break with a slight tap. As the crew continues to work on this bowl down in the center, we do want to take a second and thank our members out in our audience for joining us and for your continuous support. It's our memberships that really help us stay open here and provide all the programs that we offer here at the museum. Our Kids Design Glass program, where any child 12 and under can submit a drawing absolutely for free. This program is funded by our memberships, and also is our Hot Shop Heroes, where veterans suffering from PTSD come to the Museum of Glass to use glass as a therapy to combat it. All these programs are funded by our membership, so we would like to give a special shout out to all our members in our audience. anyone else has questions, please feel free to raise your hand or shout my name. We're gonna add a little water on the end of the punty, which causes a weak spot, a slight tap, and it breaks free on its way to the annealer, where it will cool down for the next several hours. And what a success. Can we give another round of applause to our hot shop crew down here? Well, everything produced here on this hot shop floor will always go through the annealing cycle. This will eliminate any stress that may build up in the glass when cooling down from that 2100 degrees Fahrenheit from the furnace to the room temperature. Now, as today's demonstration begins, we are going to be working with color here today. Now, the color is being picked up on the left-hand side of the studio in our garage. This oven is at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's a place where we can preheat the color itself. Color is made by adding different metals. Different metals will give us a different color. Depending on what we're making, we can use a little bit of the solid bar, or we could just use an inch or two. It will just dictate the amount of color our piece will have. We're using a glory hole, an oven at 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit to build heat on the color itself. Now, it doesn't matter what color we work with, when it's exposed at this temperature, it will make everything look red and orange. All the glass is being produced on our left-hand side of the studio, where we are melting 1,000 pounds of glass. Behind the door lies a crucible, a ceramic pot, where all the glass is being melted. The next step is to create an air bubble in the mass by blowing air and placing our finger over the hole. Now that we have an air bubble on the center and the color being melted on the right-hand side, we will join both by placing the hot color on top of the clear bubble in the center. By rolling back and forth on the steel table, we're ensuring that our color and our clear glass have joined together. The next step is to begin the gathering process to ensure we have sufficient amount of glass to move on to the next step. If you're joining us now, welcome to the Museum of Glass. We thank you for joining us this lovely Sunday afternoon. We have the Museum of Glass Hot Shop crew, our gaffer being Ben working in the center. Again, the gaffer just means the person in charge. We also have Sarah with over 18 years of experience assisting the crew. Although you see Ben today as our gaffer, maybe next week, if you come by, you will see Sarah as the gaffer. They do like to interchange. But right now, we will begin by letting the bubble cool down to ensuring we can gather sufficient amount of glass, but also, more importantly, stabilizing that core. Since we are going to spend some time working on this next piece, want to ensure we have a clean surface to work with. Using a diamond tip Dremel, we can remove any dirt or debris that may be on the rod itself. Oh, so the molten glass. So you just missed us, but we are going to gather some more molten stuff. All the glass that we're working with here is coming out of our furnaces. We have two of them, one on the right, one on the left. We're going to be using the one on the left-hand side. It is approximately at 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. It's about the same temperature as molten lava at 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. We're going to let our core cool down. This will give us the ability to gather more glass, but also just maintain control over that hot layer we will add. Yes. So behind that door lies a crucible, a ceramic pot, exactly how you described. We are melting that ceramic pot at that 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. We have a diagram on our top screen. This is just a simplified diagram of what's happening with the furnace. Thank you so much for joining us. You can open the furnace. Yes. Oh, just sneakers. So glass making with molten glass. So we do take some safety precautions. We don't allow open-toed shoes here in the studio for that exact same reason. You just never know when hot glass may end up on the ground. We're seeing Ben stepping in front of that furnace. When you're first learning to work with glass, gathering can be extremely difficult because of the intense heat that you face. Now that we've added a hot layer on the surface, we will shape it by using that wooden block, which will ensure the bubble will blow out evenly and symmetrically. We learned that color is made by adding different metals. Here at the museum, we have two furnaces. Now, we could make color here at the museum. We can take our furnace down below as an example. We can place the cobalt. Cobalt is used to create green glass, and that means all the glass that's pulled out of this furnace will be blue, which may get old after a while. So here at the museum, we melt clear glass, which will give us the ability to use the full range of the color spectrum. Here at this studio, we have our own color room. This is a room where our glass makers can go and choose out any color that they may want to use. We're seeing a short video clip of our color room on our top screen, but the manufacturer, their color room goes from the ground all the way to the ceiling. Every color you can nearly imagine. We just have a fraction of what the manufacturer makes. Before we expand our bubble any further, we will create a break-off point, a constriction, by squeezing down both blades to this tool. This will ensure that there is a crevice point where we can add a few drops of water to break it free. Now, the holiday season is just around the corner. And even here at the Museum of Glass, we have a handful of different events going on. We do have our own pumpkin workshops. Registration is now open, but this is an opportunity where you can come to the Museum of Glass and learn how to make a glass pumpkin. And you can also go home with a glass pumpkin or later on, the one that you made specifically. Now, this is due with our partnership with the Hilltop Artists, a nonprofit organization aimed to help out the youth. Students from that program will be coming here to the Museum of Glass and teaching our lovely audience workshops, our pumpkin workshops. Spaces are limited, but still available. You can talk to our front desk to reserve your spot now. We've brought over a punty, which is the transfer rod will give us the ability to begin to work on the opposite end. Now that we've added this rod, it will only be temporary, which means it needs to be strong enough to withhold any pulling or tugging that may occur, but also weak enough to break. Now, once again, my name is David. If you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand, shout my name. I'll be roaming around the audience, but also on the balcony and the hot shop floor. What prevents the rod from getting hot? Now, the steel rod that we're using is made out of stainless steel, a very poor conductor of heat. If we take a close inspection, notice that our glass makers are placing their hand directly behind any discoloration in the rod. Towards the tip, it becomes dull gray and black. Typically, we're not placing our hand in that area. Is there any significance to the steel cone-shaped structure we have here at the museum? This steel structure was designed by Arthur D. Erickson, an Canadian architect. When he was looking for inspiration for this building, he looked at the old lumber industry that used to stand here. Now, at its height, Tacoma was considered the logging capital of the world with over 73 lumber mills. With such a large lumber industry, they would burn a lot of excess wood in what's called the wigwam burner, beehive burner. These steel cone structures used to scatter our area. Nowadays, they are long gone. The closest one is in Aberdeen, Washington, and I believe there's another one out in the peninsula. Other than that, all these buildings are nearly gone. But this museum was built after that memory of the wigwam burners that stood in our area, our rich history. If you want to learn more about Tacoma's history and the logging industry that once was here, I do recommend you walk across Tacoma's waterfront. There you can learn a little bit more about the rich history in our area. Well, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us in this afternoon live glassmaking demonstration. We will now be taking our short lunch break, but we will be back in about 1 hour. I will Today we'll go through an annealing cycle. It's the oven on your left-hand side. That oven is sitting at 920 degrees. It'll be the home of everything we make here today. If it's left out here, it will break within a matter of minutes. Yes, it will harden it. It will not necessarily harden it. It will stabilize the glass. It will ensure that the inside and the outside molecules are at the same rate, are cooling at the same rate. Yes, it will slowly come back to room temperature. Starts at 920 degrees. The most amount of time will go from 920 to 600. From 600 to room temperature, that happens quite fast. Mr. Gabe Feenan is actually off in a residency in Biot, France right now. He's going to be coming back in a few weeks. Yes, he did get a residency out there. I definitely recommend checking out his social media on his Instagram. So we actually
Oh, sorry. Up until the residency, most of my work has been focused on kind of the Venetian techniques of decorating with cane. A lot of vessel work, not so much sculpture. But for this residency, I kind of took a bit of a departure. I'm not going to be pulling any cane or doing any of that kind of decoration. Kind of focused more on these objects, the clouds, mountains, suns, and moons. I started making clouds a few years ago, kind of as I take a break from picking up cane and from making larger scale pieces, and it was something small I could make relatively quickly and on my own. And so I just kind of made them for myself. It was just a fun thing for me to make. And then I made a piece out of it, ended up getting this residency because of the piece, so I figured that was probably a good sign that I should stick with it and kind of use the residency to expand on some of the ideas and give the clouds an environment to exist in. You know, I have almost gotten in car accidents because I was checking out cool clouds on my drive home from work. I walk the dog at night a lot, so I'm always kind of keeping my eye out for when the moon breaks out of the clouds, and or when it's, you know, a big super moon, blood moon, all that stuff.
Let's build a happy little cloud. Let's build some happy little...
You know, glass blowing is a battle between what you want to make and what you actually make. And over the years, I've tried to use that as a dialogue between myself and the material. And a lot of times when I'm trying to make something, the glass doesn't want to do it. And sometimes that's where the beauty comes in, is this interaction of like, well, that's not what I intended, but like a happy accident, I guess you would call it.
We don't make mistakes. We just have happy accidents. You can do anything that you want.
It's funny because a lot of glass people make clouds. This is a tricky one. And I was a little hesitant to jump into it, but I figured I could make it my own, do my own rendition of it. And yeah, everyone seems to be pretty happy. It's hard to be angry at a cloud, I think. I'm working with all my friends. I'm super lucky. I'm friends with some of the best glass blowers and sculptors out there, and I help them make a lot of their work, and they help me, and so it was a really great opportunity to just fill the shop with super talented people that are also my great friends.
I believe every day's a good day when you paint. I believe it'll bring a lot of good thoughts to your heart.
What you see here in the gallery is my latest body of work entitled Natural Progression. Much of what I like to look at, or what inspires me about making glass, I look a lot towards human body proportion and even internal organs and their shapes. My name is Benjamin Cobb and I'm from Seattle, Washington. These pieces here I think stand apart. They're pretty distinct from the other pieces in the show. I've gotten a lot of comments on especially from doctors it seems like, who recognize the title again and see the pieces and say, wow, it really fits. These are a visceral stomach and a sutured stomach. The visceral stomach, these bundles of canes are supposed to represent the striations that you find in muscle fibers and sinew. The sutured stomach has the same idea, and again there's a seam that kind of runs across the middle of the piece, so maybe a spot where it has been torn or ripped and is growing back together. This piece here is called lobated suture, and this kind of represents a newer direction in my work.